Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I'd review this little video. And this is going to be a video by that of the IBFP, this little video that I thought would be very particularly interesting to review. Oftentimes, of course, I've ended up reviewing videos, kind of pertaining to that other perspective of a Canelo Alvarez and how great I believe that he is. But I thought that it was time to do a video by a channel that I don't often review, by that of the IBFP. And of course, now talking about the perspective of a Terence Crawford, and also, once again, a little bit about both of the strengths and weaknesses of a Canelo and a Crawford. But we'll talk about that as the video goes along. But that being stated, the IBFP is someone that many people overall that they recommend me to review, or that, they basically state that the IBFP, in my personal view, other than you, is the most truthful channel out there. Well, the IBFP is someone that at times I tend to agree with him, and then there's other times where I also heavily disagree with him. He's someone that, overall can be logical to a degree. I would definitely state that he's a better channel than that, say, of an Aki TV or a Dante's Boxing Nation. Of course, that's not saying much, but it is what it is. But that being stated, the IBFP I think is a decent channel, but he is someone that, in my view, to where I do think that he goes a little bit overboard with some of the narratives or some of those quote unquote truths overall that, he kind of alleges. But, I thought that I would, watch this video kind of pertaining to his opinion and his quote unquote truth about that of a Terence Crawford to see how much I agree or how much I disagree with it. But one thing we do know about the IBFP is that he does appear overall to be a little bit more on the side of a Canelo Alvarez, not just overall in terms of winning this fight, but also in terms of the Canelo Alvarez fan base, and also just in terms of Canelo Alvarez as a fighter. So he more than likely is going to try and appease that fan base a little bit more. Not stating overall that if Crawford overall wins this fight, that he's not going to give him credit. I do believe that the IBFP will at least give Crawford credit. I think that he's at least that type of guy. So I'm not going to claim that he's someone like an Aki or a Dante's Boxing Nation or some of these other guys to where, Canelo Alvarez could win in whatever fashion that, they want, and they're still not going to give Canelo Alvarez credit no matter what. If Canelo wins, then it was basically because he was supposed to. But if Canelo loses, then basically it's because he's super overrated. That's why they really wanted this fight to happen. The LDBC and new media actually really wanted this fight to happen more than that of the David Benavidez fight. And the reason why that is because they know that they can just talk shit all the living long damn day without Canelo Alvarez getting any credit from them anyways. Because if Canelo, once again, if he beats Crawford, well, he was supposed to. Even though Canelo allegedly is supposed to be the most overrated fighter of all time and this average Mexican fighter, according to them. But, if Crawford wins, then that gives them the breathing room to state how overrated, Canelo actually is, the narrative that they really have been trying to spread all along. So it's a win-win for them. They can talk shit no matter the result. But that being stated overall, let's get into it. Let's see what the IBFP has to state. And we're talking about, I believe this video states, Canelo Alvarez will expose Terence Crawford and his hype. And the question is, overall, is Crawford a little bit overhyped heading into this fight? Or is he someone that, overall could definitely beat the brakes off of Canelo Alvarez or at least possibly win? I've already stated this. I think that this fight could go either way. It depends on what form and at what weight I see both fighters at. And also, to see, if they're at their best form or not, at least for this point in their careers. Kind of like what Chris Algieri stated, they're not going to be at their absolute prime anymore. They're both older fighters for certain, and on top of that, they just have wear and tear. But that being stated, let's see what the IBFP has to state. He brought up some interesting points that I also thought that I would kind of either counter or add on to. Let's get into it.
Welcome back to the IBFP. Here's your host, Foxy New.
Because you're fighting with nobody, and you obviously look like you're a great fighter. But you fight now September 13th. This is going to be different for you.
Canelo Alvarez will expose and destroy Terence Crawford's hype. And look, let's break it down honestly, objectively as possible.
What I'll personally state is this. This fight means a lot for both fighters because, once again, it's going to quiet a lot of the noise that has been following them for the whole entire career. So certain people that claim overall that legacy is not on the line for either fighter, I don't personally agree with that. I think that it will be easier for Crawford if he ends up losing the fight, obviously, rather than that of a Canelo Alvarez. But if Crawford does lose this fight, especially by that of a stoppage, or if he especially loses, let's just say, for example, every round in the fight, like what Jamel Charlo did, he is, kind of going to be placed a little bit lower in the all-time great rankings than what he would probably like. Right now, if Crawford were to retire, people would probably remember him along the Sugar Ray Leonard and the Roy Jones Jr. level. Although he's someone that's around that level, but I think that he would have to be a level lower just because I don't think he has quite the resume of those guys. But if you were to debate Crawford up there, especially skills-wise, I mean, skills-wise, Terence Bud Crawford is up there. But resume-wise, not quite. In my view, Canelo Alvarez, you can debate, is within that realm. But Terence Bud Crawford, I don't know if he is really quite within that realm. Canelo Alvarez, in my view, if he wins this fight, especially by a domination, it would put him in the same categories as guys like a Marvin Hagler, a Sugar Ray Leonard, maybe even a Roberto Duran, certain guys like that. When we talk about a Crawford, if he wins this fight, it definitely would put him in the same realm as guys like a Sugar Ray Leonard and a Roy Jones and certain guys like that. The top 10, the top 20 fighters of all time, somewhat similar with Canelo Alvarez in my personal view. Although, of course, Crawford is moving up in weight, but he still would have to give credit for this fight because Crawford is still a very dangerous fighter, and Canelo is not really a natural super middleweight anyway. But the point overall is that, when I do take a look at this fight, this is definitely still going to be for some sort of legacy. And if Canelo does lose this fight, then all of a sudden, especially with the added losses of a Floyd and a Dimitri Bivol, but now losing to a fighter that was moving up 2 weight classes, all of a sudden he goes in that realm and he kind of gets lowered into the realm with Oscar De La Hoya, Miguel Cotto, Juan Manuel Marquez, and some of those guys. Then all of a sudden his legacy, although still there, is still looked at completely different. And he now can probably no longer be debated as the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. As for Terence Crawford, if he loses this fight, it may keep him out of certain conversations like that of a Sugar Ray Leonard or Roy Jones Jr., especially if he gets dominated in, very, dominant fashion. But anyway.
And Terence Crawford's very last fight was against Israel Madrimov. Now, Israel Madrimov is a C-level fighter. That's who Israel...
Well, I actually don't agree with that. I think that that's going way too far. Now, what I will personally state is this. There's people overall that either go to both sides of the extreme. You get, the Terence Bud Crawford fans that say that Israel Madrimov is a guy that had, all these amateur fights. And, we've seen it with the Eastern Europeans. He helped Dimitri Bivol, train, for the Canelo Alvarez fight. And all that is great. But we've already seen what Israel Madrimov is capable of when he's against another A-grade level fighter. He's someone that is excessively talented. There's just levels to the game. There are guys that are the number 1 pound-for-pound potential fighters like Mayweather and Pacquiao and Crawford and Usyk and Canelo Alvarez. Maybe in a way there are those guys. And then right below them, there are pound-for-pound great gatekeepers like Sugar Shane Mosley, Miguel Cotto, Oscar De La Hoya, Felix Tito Trinidad, like those level of fighters, guys that maybe, if they have the right moves, could be debated as number 1 pound-for-pound or at least within the top 5 or top 10. And then right below them, you have guys that are very, very good and will give even some of the greater fighters a very tough fight, but they just are missing that je ne sais quoi that will make them A+ or maybe even an A-grade level. Fighters like Joshua Clottey back in the day, he was someone that was able to beat Zab Judah, gave Miguel Cotto a very tough fight, gave other fighters a very tough fight, but usually couldn't ever win the big one. When you take a look at Israel Madrimov, that's pretty much what he is. He's someone overall that is an A- level fighter. He is extremely, extremely talented. But in both times that we've seen him against an A-grade level fighter, he just very clearly lost. It is what it is. And I do believe that Virgil Ortiz had the better performance over that of an Israel Madrimov. That being stated, both fights were still very competitive. But I do believe that Israel Madrimov, that he did look worse against Virgil Ortiz.
Madrimov is. Israel Madrimov won a vacant belt, never beat a straight-up world champion, has no significant names on his resume, and just lost to Virgil Ortiz in better fashion, and Virgil Ortiz was never a world champion. Now, Terence Crawford, when life...
Well, Virgil Ortiz was never a world champion, but let's also not discount that of a Virgil Ortiz. Virgil Ortiz is someone that has top 10 pound-for-pound ability. He really does. If he's someone that was even able to beat that of a Jerome Butenis, I wouldn't be surprised. Virgil Ortiz is someone that has the goods. He is a great, great level fighter.
Death with a C-level Israel Madrimov. Think about that. He's a C-level guy, and Terence Crawford went life and death with this guy. Now, what's interesting is Canelo Alvarez on the other side of the coin, he fought Gennady Golovkin, Triple G, at 160 pounds, and Triple G's an 8
what I'll personally state is this, and this is why you cannot discount many people's predictions. Because many people just take a look at something and they're like, oh, this is similar, so there must be a complete correlation between these things. That's why overall, when you were taking a look at the David Morrell and David Benavidez fight, so many people were taking a look at that fight and they were saying, oh, well, Morrell's going to, surprise the world. Demetrius Andrade is going to shock the world because those guys are the slick black American fighters, and those types of fighters always usually beat, overall the pressure fighters like that of a David Benavidez who don't have the best of movement nor the best of feet. And you're right, oftentimes they do. But Demetrius Andrade and David Morrell, they're not Floyd Mayweather, they're not Terence Crawford, which is why I had predicted David Benavidez to beat both of those fighters. Because anyone that clearly knew what the hell they were watching knew that those two fighters were not going to beat David Benavidez. Because they're not Mayweather, they're not Crawford. They never were. So like I said, there's levels to the game. And people took a look at Israel Madrimov, and they basically stated, and let me also say this about David Morrell. Morrell's not even someone that fights in that type of style anyway. Like, if you take a look at Morrell, and I've already stated this, he's a pressure fighter. He's someone that can fight a little bit on the back foot, but he's not someone that prefers to. He's actually very limited on the back foot, which is why he really should have lost his last fight against Imam Katiev, that one Russian fighter that was pressuring him the whole entire time. Pretty much got a gift decision in my personal view, or at least debatably. I'd have to rewatch the fight. But, the first time I watched it, I thought that he really should have lost that fight. But anyways, moving on. Like, I remember when Israel Madrimov first popped up on the scene, and they said that, oh, Madrimov reminds me of, like, the next Gennady Golovkin. Pretty much because he looked very similar to him in terms of the face and the haircut, and on top of that, he was an Eastern European fighter that had a lot of amateur fights, but they don't fight anywhere near the same. Madrimov fights completely off of feints and movement and, very quick feet, but he's someone that also has a problem with pulling the trigger. Gennady Golovkin is someone that works off an exceptional level jab, someone overall that will try to really get you up against the ropes and then try to break you down. But he's also someone that can fight in the mid-range and also a little bit on the back foot very well. They're two people, once again, that many people are like, oh, Eastern European fighters that have a lot of amateur fights, they must be exactly the same. They're not.
Level elite fighter. Triple G is one of the best middleweights.
And Gennady Golovkin is someone that is technically better and someone that was a bigger threat than an Israel Madrimov. It just is what it is.
In boxing history. And Canelo Alvarez had two very close, controversial fights with him, and yet people slam and trash Canelo for having very difficult fights against an A-level elite fighter like Gennady Golovkin. Nobody wanted to fight this guy. He was a monster. He was a killer, one of the best middleweights in history, and literally people are hating on Canelo for having a hard fight with an A-level elite guy. But yet what's funny is no one seems to notice or care.
Well, I've always stated this. People always love to bring up this point with whatever current fighter it is. And it's not just Canelo Alvarez. This has been going on for I don't know how many years, and it's not even just boxing, like it's literally every sport. People always claim overall that, this guy couldn't compete back then. I've never seen a fighter that got so many gift decisions, blah, blah, blah. It's all this other shit. Like, people will take a look at the current fighter and say that, oh, well, they couldn't compete with guys back then, overall because this guy gets so many gift decisions. Do you understand that Sugar Ray Leonard was a guy that many people don't believe that he beat Marvin Hagler or Tommy Hearns in the rematch, and he also lost to Roberto Duran, moving up 2 weight classes? Do you understand that happened in Sugar Ray Leonard's career? So, Manny Pacquiao, there's a lot of people that will still tell you that they don't believe that he beat Juan Manuel Marquez in any of those fights. Do I agree with that? No, I don't, but there's people that will tell you that. There are many people that believe that Muhammad Ali should have lost all 3 fights to Kenny Norton and also should have lost the Jimmy Young fight. When we talk about, other fighters overall, I mean, Roy Jones, I'm trying to think, of another example. But the point overall is that there are certain people, overall to where they also have controversial decisions or decisions that could have went either way, and then they always forget about it in about 10 to 20 years. And then they claim this new fighter that, oh, well, he gets so many gift decisions. He can't be compared to some of these other fighters of history. Can he really not be compared to the fighters of history? Because people act like overall that these guys, like there's never been controversy in other guys' career. Even in Julio Cesar Chavez Sr.'s career, he didn't deserve a draw over Pernell Whitaker. That draw that he got over Pernell Whitaker was way worse than the draw that Canelo had over Golovkin, And on top of that one controversial stoppage that, Meldrick Taylor had with like 2 seconds left in the round, and that referee decided to stop it, and possibly the worst call I've ever seen in boxing history. So, I mean, it just is what it is. People act like, the current fighters that they have all this controversy, and then the fighters of old that they're so much more authentic and that they never had, any controversy. But history shows us that it oftentimes repeats itself.
That Bud Crawford struggled and had hell went life and death with the C-level Israel Madrimov. It's clear.
Well, Israel Madrimov, for any of us that know boxing, he's not someone that's a C-grade level fighter. I'm sorry, I just cannot agree with that. But what I will personally state is this. I've never seen Canelo Alvarez almost lose to a fighter or someone that massively struggled against a B-grade level fighter other than maybe like a William Skull. But that's kind of when Canelo Alvarez, first of all, not only was a decent amount outsized, but also he's pretty old at this point, at least for his standards. He just is. To be fair, I've never seen Canelo Alvarez struggle against an opponent like that to the degree that a Terence Crawford struggled over Aegis Kavaliauskas, for example, where he lost a few rounds in that fight, and then on top of that, he got legitimately knocked down in that fight, at least in my personal view. He got hit with the right hand, and then Crawford was hurt. He had to hug him real quick, overall, or tie him up real quick, but Aegis was still able to knock him down, although the referee kind of blew the call in my view. Now, I did see Canelo Alvarez get badly hurt against Jose Cotto, I believe, but that was when he was 19 and was not a championship level fighter. That was looked at during the peak of Crawford's career when he got hurt against Aegis Kavaliauskas.
Hype. I mean, let's just be honest. How do you struggle with a C-level fighter and Canelo struggles with an A-level fighter, and yet it doesn't make any sense how people are judging the two as the same? Because they're not. Terence Crawford is being massively overrated. His resume is garbage truck juice. Let me break this down a little bit more. A lot of people think that Bud Crawford is unbeatable, and he's this massively unbeatable fighter. He's elite on another level simply because he's displayed A+ skills against C and D level fighters, also wash fighters and hype.
What I will personally state is this. I don't think that Terence Crawford is massively overrated, but what I will state is this. I do think that the people claiming that Crawford is quote-unquote unbeatable, I do think that they're overrating his ability just to a degree. I don't think that Canelo Alvarez nor Terence Crawford are quite on the level of, say, someone like a Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather was someone that when I take a look at him, just all around skills-wise and ability-wise, especially at his peak weight class, but even not at his peak weight class, Floyd Mayweather is someone that is like a 10 out of 10 or like an 11 out of 10 fighter. That's what Floyd Mayweather Jr. is. When you take a look at, Canelo and Crawford, they're guys overall that, are like 9.5 out of 10s. That's pretty much what they are. They're guys that, are extremely great, but they're not quite on the level of a Mayweather in my view, because they do have certain Achilles heels. Crawford is someone that is not a super great defensive fighter on average. He's someone overall that, sometimes can be caught with his head a little bit too much on the center line, although he does have very great head movement, but he's someone that still can be caught a little bit too much. He is not, at times, super defensively great. And Canelo Alvarez, of course, the thing that we know about him is that he doesn't have the greatest of feet. And of course we can talk about other things as well, like Canelo not having the best of stamina and, Crawford, probably not having a granite chin. But I mean, I'll leave that, for another combo. But what I will personally state is this, because I remember on a live one time, I claimed that in my view that Canelo has the better defense of the two fighters. And certain people were saying, what are you talking about? Because Crawford, statistically, he has the better defensive numbers. Well, that's fine. But it's pretty easy overall to have the better defensive numbers when you're fighting guys like Aegis Kavaliauskas and Jose Benavidez and Jeff Horn and Joyce Ndongo and Thierry Jean and Felix Diaz. Like, it's no offense. But, there's pretty much any all-time great level fighter is probably going to look defensively and offensively great against those fighters. But when we take a look at Crawford's performances in some of the bigger fights of his career, he's not quite as accurate or as dominant or someone that, is quite as defensively responsible as what you may think. Take a look at the statistics with him in the Postal fight, and he was extremely dominant in that fight. But, if you take a look at the stats in that fight, it's not as far apart as what you may think. The Sean Porter fight, Terence Crawford didn't even land 30% of his punches. And then on top of that, Sean Porter was able to land at 23%. I've already told people this. Although Canelo did not throw a whole lot in, in the Bivol fight, at least, as what he regularly did, Canelo, of course, did not have good accuracy in that fight. He only landed about 15% of his shots. But he also made Dimitri Bivol land at 21% in that fight. And that was a Canelo that clearly was outsized and also lethargic in that fight. Sean Porter, Israel Madrimov, and Aegis Kavaliauskas all landed at a higher percentage over Terence Crawford. than what a Dimitri Bivol did, or a Danny Jacobs, or I believe a Caleb Plant did over that of a Canelo Alvarez. The only fighter ever in the history in Canelo Alvarez's career that has ever landed at a super high accuracy rating was that of a Floyd Mayweather. Now, of course, do you necessarily have to land 50% in order to win a fight? No, not necessarily. But I think that Canelo Alvarez is a lot harder to hit than what most people realize, which is why when you take a look at Crawford's fight against Porter, he landed about 29% of his punches compared to Porter's like 22 or 23%. You know, when we talk about Madrimov landed about 29%. Crawford only landed 22%. Of course, that style was very difficult if you want to claim that, especially with the amount of feints and movement of Madrimov. If you want to claim that, it was a very awkward style. And then, of course, when you want to also take a look at, I believe, that of the Aegis Kavalauskas fight, you know, Kavalauskas was able to land a good solid like 30 to 33% in that fight over Crawford. So my point is that, yes, Canelo, when you take a look overall, even at some of the more troubling opponents, he is the more defensively responsible fighter. It just is what it is.
That's what he's done. I mean, yeah, anybody would display A+ skills against C and D level fighters. That's a good fighter. And also against wash fighters and hype jobs. Terence Crawford has looked tremendous against low-tier fighters. He's been feasting.
Well, it depends on what we count as hype jobs. To me, what a hype job is someone that, you know, overall, there's really no warrant to the amount of hype that he got. Maybe certain guys like a Ryan Garcia to a degree. You know, even guys like a Victor Ortiz, I can kind of understand to a degree. But I'm not going to claim, you know, Israel Madrimov as a quote-unquote hype job. He's someone that is an A- level fighter, and I definitely don't think that Spence was a hype job if that's what you're claiming. But anyway.
On low-tier fighters. Let me give you an understanding of this. Canelo Alvarez, clearly an A-level fighter, clearly a guy that's fought the best of the best in boxing. Take tons of risks throughout his career, but check this out. If you take Canelo Alvarez and put him next to Terence Crawford's resume, he would literally beat everybody on Terence Crawford's resume without incident, wouldn't be close, and he'd have a 100% knockout rate. Terence Crawford's resume, he would literally beat everybody on Terence Crawford's resume without incident, wouldn't be close, and he'd have a 100%.
I'm not quite sure if I would 100% say that it wouldn't be close. It would depend overall if they were a part of the same weight class. You know, I think that Canelo more than likely would have beat Errol Spence probably with, I'm not going to say ease, but I think that he probably would have clearly won. I just don't think that Spence overall, other than, you know, great power and stamina, I just don't think overall that he would have had anything over Canelo Alvarez. He wouldn't have had the movement. He wouldn't have had the speed. He wouldn't have had, you know, really a lot of things. Nor the boxing IQ. He would have not had the counter-punching ability. He would have not had the lead hand. I think Canelo just would have had too much over Spence. But that would have been a very interesting fight had they been both naturally the same weight class, you know, because Spence is someone that, you know, kind of can, you know, get to fighters and kind of get them, you know, with his level of stamina. But anyway, you know, when we take a look at Madrimov, I do believe that Canelo would more than likely defeat him. Of course, I also believe that he would end up defeating Porter. But anyways, the point is this. Just because a fighter would end up beating everyone on that guy's resume doesn't necessarily mean that guy still will not win the fight. You know, when we take a look at Joe Calzaghe's resume, for example, I think that pretty much all the fighters that Joe Calzaghe beat, you know, that Bernard Hopkins would pretty much beat, at least when they were at their absolute best. But Joe Calzaghe beat Bernard Hopkins.
% knockout rate. So with that same resume, Canelo Alvarez would look unbeatable as well because he would have ran through those guys. I mean, let's just be honest and unbiased. He would have ran through everybody on Terence Crawford's resume and got a 100% knockout rate. I mean, who would stop him? Who would give him a hard time? None of these. Israel Madrimov got a 100% knockout.
That being stated, I would have loved to have seen Terence Crawford either against a prime Lara or a Golovkin had they been the same weight class, just to see what would have happened.
Rate. I mean, who would stop him? Who would give him a hard time? None of these guys. Errol Spence? No.
Well, I'm not going to claim that. I think that Errol Spence and Madrimov, that they could have potentially gave Canelo a hard time, you know, especially a prime Spence. But other than that, there's just not enough fighters, in my view, that would have probably given Canelo Alvarez a life and death fight. Maybe Spence, and that's really about it.
Israel Madrimov, absolutely not. He couldn't handle Virgil Ortiz's pressure and power, but he's going to handle Canelo's? Come on.
Virgil Ortiz is someone that's an A-grade level fighter, though. Virgil Ortiz, in my view, actually is debatably an A-plus level fighter. He's just someone that hasn't gotten a hold of a belt yet. just in my view, you put Virgil Ortiz against any of the champions at 154 right now. I don't know if Crawford is still a champion there or not. But other than maybe Crawford, he beats everyone else there.
Stop it.
Other than maybe Jerome Boots Ennis, but Boots is not a champion there yet, I believe.
David Avenetian, ain't no way. I mean, or Washkel Brook. I mean, who are we talking about? A one-legged Benavidez? Who else do you have? Julius Ndongo? Like, none of these guys. Jeff Horn? Canelo cooks all of these guys, makes it easy work for all.
He definitely, in my view, would cook Julius Ndongo and Jeff Horn. Those guys are just not A-grade level fighters. Canelo, in my view, would more than likely beat the piss out of them, even if they were the same weight class. But what I will personally say is that Spence would have been an interesting fight. Madrimov, it would have been interesting. I'm not quite sure if he would have beat Canelo. I think that more than likely he would have not thrown enough in the fight, but it would have been interesting because the amount of feints and also the amount, of angles that he uses, and on top of that, his quick feet. But I think Canelo would have been a little bit too much, and I'm sure there's some other ones, but I will state this, about what the IBFP is saying. The one fighter that I do believe that, probably would compete with Canelo, maybe pretty much the only fighter would be Spence. All the other fighters, I believe that if they were a part of the same weight class, and I don't always like to use that argument, but Spence is pretty much the only exceptional fighter, in my view, on that, of Crawford's resume. I mean, it depends on what you mean by exceptional, but to me, exceptional is someone that's debatably top 10, top 20 pound for pound.
So no wonder Terence Crawford is being vastly overrated and overhyped and overstated, because he's showing A-plus skills against C or D level fighters and even washed fighters. So of course he's being overrated because he's never stepped in with another A-level fighter. He's just never done that. Now there's some people.
Well, that's not true. I mean, not only was Madrimov someone that was an A-grade level fighter in my view, but Spence definitely was. I mean, come on. You can't beat the names like a Danny Garcia and, like that of what else did he defeat? Mikey Garcia, Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, Kell Brook. You can't defeat all those guys. Yordenis Ugas and not be an A-grade level fighter. I mean, come on. We got to give the man a little bit of credit here.
Let's say, what about Errol Spence? He was A-level. He was the top guy in the division. This is what they will say. And my rebuttal
Right, but he was.
to that is this. Team Terence Crawford does not agree with that. Team Terence Crawford.
Right, but I've already stated this. You can't always go off of what fighters always state. Like Alexander Usyk, there's many people that state that, Usyk says that Crawford's the number one pound for pound fighter. If you ask Alexander Usyk, he'll tell you that Anthony Joshua is better than him. Like, now, do I believe that he actually believes that? No. But the thing overall is that you can't always count what these fighters state, which is why, once again, oftentimes the people that usually give the best analyses and the best breakdowns, they're not usually the best of the best. Talking about fighters.
Errol Spence was a hype job.
I don't agree with that. Once again, you cannot beat the names that he beat and just be a quote-unquote hype job.
Was never a great fighter, but Crawford says he's not even Hall of Fame worthy. So we see that.
Which is pretty surprising in my personal view. Which definitely pissed off a lot of the LDBC and new media guys because, of course you have certain pro PBC guys that would be highly offended by that. And then on top of that, these guys that are trying to stick up for that of a Terence Bud Crawford, they're like, dude, what are you talking about? That's like the one exceptional fighter that you fought and he's not a Hall of Famer? What does that say about your resume?
Team Crawford doesn't believe this man was elite. They don't believe this man was A-level. And when he was asked about his best fighter on his resume, he didn't even name Errol Spence. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to put him at an A-level fighter if Terence Crawford and his team won't. I mean, let's just be.
Well, what I'm just going to personally state is this. If you're one of these guys that just takes the word of like every fighter, then at least be consistent. Don't just use it overall when it fits your narrative. Because guys overall like that, of a Dante or some of these other guys, they'll say, well, who are you to talk about it? Because these fighters actually know boxing. They participate in boxing. And they say that he's the number one pound for pound or this and that. So who are you to disagree? No problem. But then just have that same narrative, every time. No problem. Like when Terence Bud Crawford states that Errol Spence was a quote-unquote hype job and you're someone that agrees with everything that some of these other fighters state, no problem. Then agree that Errol Spence was someone that's not a Hall of Famer.
Honest and unbiased. So Terence Crawford has looked fantastic, but he's looked fantastic against low-tier fighters. And the worst thing is, Terence Crawford is actually buying into the hype that people are saying about him. This is the same Terence Crawford that says my skill level is day and night compared to Canelo Alvarez. Well, it's easy to say that when you're fighting C and D level guys. You haven't stepped in there against an A level guy. I mean, it's easy to criticize Canelo for fighting guys like Bivol or Floyd or Triple G or Callum Smith or any of these other guys when you've never fought anybody like any of those people.
I remember when a lot of these channels were trying to spread the narrative that Callum Smith was this quote-unquote hype job. Callum Smith is not someone that's a hype job. He's someone overall that is a legit A-grade level fighter. Now, is he someone that, is ever going to be top 5 or top 10 pound for pound? No. But he's still someone overall that is a legit A-grade level fighter, which is why he fought the very talented Joshua Buatsi in his last fight, and he whooped that man's ass. Like, he won 9 rounds to 3 in that fight.
Fighting the Jeff Horns of the world, the Julius Ndongos of the world. You've been fighting Israel Madrimov, going life and death with a C-level fighter. But we can't even say it because these guys get all upset and emotional.
Well, what I'll personally say is this. I think that the IBFP is definitely, just in my personal view, a bit delusional to call Israel Madrimov a C-grade level fighter. I don't think that we can debate that he's a C-grade level fighter. He was competitive in both the Crawford and the Virgil Ortiz fights. He was, and any fighter that is competitive in both of those fights, they're not a C-grade level fighter. So, I mean, it is what it is. But anyways, that being stated overall, what I will overall state is that I do believe that Crawford, that I think certain people are thinking that the skill gap between both Canelo and Crawford is a bit wider than what I think the actual reality is. But like I stated, we'll see fight night.
Let's just be honest. Terence Crawford is a great fighter. He's an excellent fighter. But that doesn't change the fact that he's been feasting on low-tier opposition, and it's hard to tell.
A lot of the times he has been. And I'm not going to lie. A lot of the times he has been. People can like that, they can not like that. But like I stated, other than Gamboa, Porter, Spence, Madrimov, and Postal, he hasn't really fought a whole lot. Really, he hasn't fought any other A-grade level fighters other than those guys.
How good he really is because he's never been truly challenged by a top-tier fighter. That's what it is. That's why he's being hyped so much. And his team is buying into this nonsense. Let me give you another example. You see that Bomac, Terence Crawford's trainer, said that, hey, Terence Crawford would beat Canelo Alvarez like they did Errol Spence. Think about what he's saying. Terence Crawford is going to beat Canelo.
Now, you take a look at this thing right here. He says, Bud beats his ass. He outboxes him. Weight don't matter. Bud's been fighting bigger people all his life. No, he really hasn't. And I've explained this so many times. Crawford is someone that is 5'8" with a 74-inch reach. That were hydrates at 160, even when he was at 135 and 140. There was no way that he was a natural 135 pounder or a natural 140 pounder for the rest of his career. He was able to stay there for a little bit and be a natural 135 pounder, but eventually he was always going to have to move up to 147. When you take a look at Canelo, he was a guy that eventually was going to grow into the 160-pound weight class. But other than that, he's not a natural 168 nor a natural 175 pounder. Canelo has fought guys that have been legitimately bigger than him. Literally, his reign, like at 154, other than Mayweather, pretty much every fighter that he fought there was, either slightly bigger than him or the same size as him. When you take a look at his career at 160 plus, every fighter that he's fought there has pretty much been bigger than him. Golovkin, Jacobs, Kovalev, Saunders was probably around the same size as him. Overall, Callum Smith, Caleb Plant, Jaime Munguia, Jamel Charlie moved up a couple weight classes to be fair, so they were probably similar in size. Dimitri Bivol, when you take a look at Canelo in these fights, the comparison, the size is not even close. Like the one fighter that he fought at 160, I will state this, that was smaller than him was Miguel Cotto, but that's because Cotto's not a natural middleweight. Anyway.
Like he did Errol Spence. So you're telling me that Terence Crawford is going to go in the ring, dog Canelo Alvarez like he did Errol Spence? Well, if Terence Crawford is that great, why didn't he do that to a C-level Israel Madrimov?
I will personally state this because that point is not necessarily completely irrelevant. Madrimov does bring a different type of style to the table than what a Canelo does. But what I will personally state is this. Crawford moving up even a couple of weight classes, and his last fight against Madrimov, it's not like he looked super dominant. So he very clearly was affected overall by the size and the power and the girth, and him also gaining a little bit of weight. He looked slower, he looked more hittable, and he did not look as effective in terms of his athleticism nor his power. And I'm sorry, but after taking a look at that performance, but even if that performance didn't happen, I'm just highly doubting that he's going to move up a couple of weight classes to Canelo, and just completely hurt Canelo Alvarez with every punch. I'm not saying it.
I don't understand. You couldn't do Israel.
Not stating overall that he can't hurt Canelo, but to just act like he's going to do the same thing to Canelo as what he did to Spence. I mean, I guess I've been wrong before, but I just don't see it happening.
Off like you did Errol Spence, but you gonna do Canelo like you did Errol Spence?
Agreed.
The math doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. Once again, it all goes back to the basics. And the basics is Terence Crawford has shown A+ level skills against C and D level opponents.
Well, he's also showed A+ level skills against guys like Errol Spence as well. That being stated, his dominance has been a little bit overrated in my personal view. Not stating that he's still not a very dominant fighter, but when you take a look at a certain amount of statistics, and on top of that, also his fights against Sean Porter and Madrimov, and even a guy like a B-grade level fighter like Aegis Kavalaskas, his dominance is a little bit, overrated. Although he has someone that, is severely dominant in his career, no doubt about it.
Fighters like Kell Brooks, hype jobs like Errol Spence. This is according to Terence Crawford's own team. So we just got to be honest and unbiased.
Which is something that I would definitely not sign off on. Even if, no matter how many times Crawford says it, I would never overall be dumb enough to personally claim that Errol Spence is a quote-unquote hype job. I'm sorry, but no.
About it. I mean, people don't want to be honest.
Now, do I think that Errol Spence was a bit rusty from the layoff in that fight? And that he looked probably maybe not quite at absolute peak form? I mean, maybe you can argue that, but he still looks, at pretty damn good form.
But Julius Sandongo is garbage truck juice. Jeff Hornet's garbage truck juice. Israel Madrimov just got beat by Virgil Ortiz, who's never won a world title. So who is Israel Madrimov? Let's just be real about it. They don't give Virgil credit. They don't give him any props. So what are we talking about? Israel Madrimov didn't go out there and beat no champion. He won a vacant title, and Terence Crawford went life and death with.
I do agree with that. Israel Madrimov was not someone that, or Madrimov, however you want to pronounce it, he was not someone that won the title off of someone that was fantastic. He won a vacant title, and then he ended up, I believe, beating a guy named Kurbanov or something like that. A very good fighter, but no one that's great.
This man is simply overhyped, overrated, overstated. Even though he's an excellent fighter, he's only shown that against low-tier opposition. Things are going to be different when he steps in the ring against Saul Canelo Alvarez.
We'll see about that, my man. But anyways, that being stated, I thought that video was particularly interesting. Do I agree with every point that he stated? No, I don't. He brought up some points that I thought were interesting, but I mean, come on, man. We can't claim overall that Crawford has never been in the ring with an A-grade level fighter. That just wouldn't be fair. But what I will overall personally state is that if Crawford is someone that gets dominated in this fight, and if he gets stopped or beat, to a pulp in this fight, or just very clearly outboxed, I wouldn't be surprised if Canelo Alvarez actually tries to make this fight last as long as possible. If he's able to do that, if Canelo gets a great start and is able to win 5 or, the first 6 rounds or something like that, I wouldn't be surprised if Canelo Alvarez actually wants this fight to go to decision or for him to get the stoppage later on. Because he might want, kind of like how Spence did against Garcia and other guys, he may want to seem like his boxing ability, is at a great level. And look, I just can't beat Crawford, off of, just brutality and strength. I can also box. But anyway, that pretty much is about it for today. We'll see what happens. That'll be about it. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see where this goes. But I thought the IBFP was a bit too harsh on Crawford. I'm not going to call him someone that is massively overrated. I do think that at times he's a bit overrated in certain categories, but he's someone that's still an all-time great level fighter. But that being stated, if he is someone that gets dominated in this fight, and loses this fight, certain perspectives might change. So hopefully for Crawford's sake, he at least can make a fight out of it, if not win it for his sake. But we'll see. And Canelo, of course, his legacy is definitely on the line here, because if he loses this fight, it's going to be tarnished to a certain degree, at least compared to what it was. But that being stated, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later. We'll see where this goes.